I'm worried about marriage equality, and I know I take this personally, given that it's my last name on the case, but we've had 2 Supreme Court justices come out and point blank say they would like to review this case, overturn it, so I'm worried about that. I know we have the Respect for Marriage Act in place, which makes me happy because that act, regardless of what happens to Obergefell v. Hodges, that act would require all states to recognize all marriages. But what upsets me about it is if Obergefell is overturned, yes, the Respect for Marriage Act is there as a backstop, but we still would not have marriage equality at that point because there are many states, including Ohio, that still have the Defense of Marriage Acts on the book. And if Obergefell is overturned, there are states that could immediately say, we're going to enforce this Defense of Marriage Act that we have on the books and refuse to issue marriage licenses to the citizens of their state. So to me, that isn't marriage equality. I love that all marriages would have to be recognized, but it could go back to a place where couples in a state like Ohio would be forced to leave their home and go to another state in order to do something millions of others take for granted, get married. So I am worried about marriage equality. I like to think that given the disaster it would create if marriage equality were overturned, that would keep the court from doing that. But there's no guarantee, and I do worry about that. And I think about all of the people out there who over the past 10 years have grown up in a world where they know that whomever they happen to love, they can get a marriage license and get married in the place they call home. And I think that would be a terrible thing to lose for those people. And that's one of the things that upsets me the most. What are we saying to people in those states about their worth, their value, and how we respect them as human beings and their ability to commit to one person, that person they love?
In the Obergefell decision, Justice Kennedy did a masterful job of explaining why marriage is fundamental and why it rises above a popular vote or any sort of majority democratic process. And he explained that central to the notion of marriage is the notion of individual autonomy and the fact that we need to be able to make our own decisions. And he explained how central marriage is to our civil society as an institution, as a way of organizing our civic life, our civil life. And he explained how important marriage is for our children in our society. And the thought that those enduring, permanent notions could flip with the vote of a single justice makes the idea of fundamental not make sense. So I am hopeful that Justice Kennedy's brilliant opinion will remain persuasive and that the doctrine of stare decisis, the power of precedent, will carry us forward. But I join Jim in saying, I can't make any guarantees. And while it would be great to get the marriage ban out of the Ohio Constitution, I don't know anybody who's got $9 million to do the statewide campaign. And especially if you say, well, we don't really need it now, but we could need it, therefore we should vote to do it. People don't spend money on those kind of woulda, shoulda, couldas. And so it remains under threat. And that's unfortunate. If Obergefell is reversed, well, then, at least as a civil rights lawyer, I will tell you that we've got a warm-up going with respect to abortion rights. Across the country, there are many of us who have been dusting off our state constitutions and examining them very carefully to secure those rights that may not otherwise be secured. Now, in Ohio, since we have a marriage ban in the state constitution, this wouldn't help. But in many other states, the state constitution, right of privacy, right of equal protection may well anchor marriage rights state by state. I taught a course at the UC Law School a couple of years ago on Ohio's Constitution. Our Equal Protection Clause actually predates the federal Equal Protection Clause by 14 years. And that means there's a different history, a different purpose, a different way of arguing what a violation of equal protection means. Where there is language of principle that sets out enduring notions like equal protection and due process, there will be lawyers seizing on that language to promote equal rights, and that will include gay marriage.
Should that happen, I will be involved in any way that I can. And it isn't just because, again, the case carries my name. That isn't what motivates me should this fight be necessary. I'm motivated by being part of something that made the world better for other people. And I just can't sit by and let that step forward, that progress we've made in our nation, be taken away. And I think about people in Ohio, and they could lose that right to get a marriage license, and they deserve that right. I also think about a young woman who told me in Tennessee that if it weren't for marriage equality, if it weren't for Obergefell v. Hodges, if it weren't for a lawsuit, she would have committed suicide. But that decision gave her a future where before she did not see a future for herself. So for me, if Obergefell should be overturned, I will be open and willing to do whatever people smarter than I am say, Jim, this is what we're doing, this is what we can do, this is what we would love you to be part of. I will do that for people like that young woman because she deserves that future. Every kid deserves to see that future for themselves. So I'm not an attorney, so I can't think in the way that Al does about what we could do, but I'll be there to join that fight, to be vocal, to be part of ensuring that we do what we can in the state of Ohio and in other states and in any way to ensure that our right to marry doesn't go away.
Well, and your story inspires to this day, so that'll be a big part of any ongoing advocacy for sure.
Yeah, stories are incredibly powerful. I have learned that again and again. I mean, stories are how we connect with others. It's how we change hearts and minds. I mean, I had those firsthand experiences. I mean, I had a man sitting in the Supreme Court next to me during oral arguments shake my hand and thank me for fighting this fight and telling me it was the right thing. And then he told me that he had changed his mind about marriage equality as an evangelical Republican after learning more about John's and my story. And his twin brother, a Roman Catholic priest, told him the same thing. So stories are incredibly powerful. And I really look at stories as not only the way we change hearts and minds, but it's the foundation of how we make lasting change. So yes, stories are vitally important. And what I love about Obergefell v. Hodges, it's my name, John's and my story that get the vast majority of the attention. But there are other equally as compelling and important stories within that case. Parents, children. So stories are going to be a huge part of whatever we have to do to protect, defend, and save this right.
Justice Kennedy started his summary of the facts that brought us to the decision with Jim and John's story. And very close to the end, in his eloquent wrap-up, he makes a specific point to say how, in describing how fundamental marriage is, he says it even reaches beyond death. So it's, once again, the importance of your story. Very powerful.
Well, and I love the fact that the last page of the decision has become such a part of marriages across the country. Same-sex marriages, opposite-sex marriages. That last page in the summary decision just so perfectly expresses what marriage means and how important it is. And people want that as part of their wedding ceremonies. And I've had the honor and joy of including that I think I've officiated about 30 marriages now, and that's always part of it. So yeah, that decision and Justice Kennedy's words are meaningful, touching, important, and they'll be a great tool going forward for whatever we need to do.
Part of what we're actually talking about is the fact that those stories change minds. And, you can track that because people do polling. And we went from when we first started litigating gay rights cases to like 20% of the country being in favor of gay marriage to now 70% of the country. And we also were educated about that, not only from stories like Jim's, but just the depiction and the normalizing of gay marriage in social media and in regular TV and movies and so on. And I just was involved in a case where a sorority was litigating among its members because the leadership of the sorority refused to accept a trans person as a woman. And, so what's a woman? And this goes to court. So I wrote an amicus brief on behalf of supporting those who believe that trans women are women, and appended a large appendix that listed all the ways that we are now normalizing trans people as part of that same effort to remind people that there are trans people all around us, that there are folks that may not fit your narrow model, but they have lives, they have children, they have parents, they are brothers, they are cousins, and they have jobs. And they also want to be at sororities. So these are great moments for educating and hopefully guarding against the premise of your question, which is what happens if there's a reversal. Maybe the country won't want it.
From my perspective as a plaintiff and as someone who never once in his life thought about suing the state of Ohio or becoming an activist or going to the Supreme Court, I've learned a couple things, and really I think people might roll their eyes when I say this next part. I always boil it down to this. When we met Al for the first time, and he asked if we wanted to do something to fight for our marriage to exist, to fight for dignity in the eyes of the state of Ohio, where we lived, I really say that was a very simple yes or no question. And it boiled down to, were we willing to fight for what we believed in, what was right, and what was important to us at that moment in our lives? And honestly, there was only one possible answer that John and I could have, and that was yes, we will fight for this because we matter. We exist, and we should exist in the state we call home. And I think people going forward, it's going to take a lot of people in a similar situation to answer that question. Are they willing to fight for the right things? Are they willing to fight for themselves, for others? Are they willing to fight to make the world a better place? So I look at that. Yes, it's a simple yes or no question, which is huge. And the potential impact of your answer to that decision is huge. The other thing I learned throughout the case is you never know where you have allies. Obergefell v. Hodges. Well, Hodges was the head of the Ohio Department of Health. Hodges was on our side the entire time. Rick Hodges and I are friends. We've done events together. We've done press conferences together. He was on our side. So he never once went to court. He did not talk to the media. And what he did in the background as the head of that department was make sure that when Ohio lost, because Rick fully expected John and I, all of the plaintiffs in Obergefell v. Hodges, he expected us to win, and he wanted us to win. So he spent his time making sure he had the entire Ohio Department of Health ready to go when the Supreme Court said, Ohio, you lose. So that every way that that department impacted queer people in Ohio, they were ready to go with forms that respected and recognized queer people, queer relationships, marriages. So you never know where there's an ally. Most people would expect that Rick Hodges and I would be sworn enemies. I mean, we're on the opposite side of the V on a Supreme Court case, but we're not. He was an ally. So you never know where you have allies. So keep that in mind. And if you have that opportunity to answer yes or no to a question of what's important to you and are you willing to fight for it, I hope you answer yes. It's going to take a lot of that going forward for all of us.
Yeah, and we have plenty of opportunity right now with the assault on DEI. You know, what is that at its root? It's an assault on the notion of equality. All DEI is a commitment to non-discrimination. That's pretty basic. And there's no favoritism, there's no affirmative action, there's no privilege extended or special rights to any group. It's a code word for being in favor of racism and against non-discrimination. So people need to speak up. It's a great opportunity to remind ourselves of first principles. And we have committed ourselves since the formalization of the end of the Civil War in the 14th Amendment to equal protection. And we've learned over the years that should include women. Within marriage, women became equal partners as a result of equal protection. That includes people who are so-called illegitimate kids because equal protection brought their rights to an equal basis. That includes prisoners when it came to marriage rights. So we have a long tradition of recognizing that somebody's being treated as an other and then bringing them in. And we have to maintain it. We have to continue. And we can't stop. And we can't get seduced by appeals to privilege. That's wrong.
Lately, I've been asked a lot, what advice do you have for young people, for others who want to make sure that the rights that we have been enjoying aren't taken away? And it's a rough time right now, and people are feeling afraid, they're worried. And my response, the things that I always come back to are, you never know where you have allies. Everyone has a voice. And we need everyone to use their voice in a couple different ways. Contact your elected officials every chance you get when there's something happening in your state, in that state legislature, that's harmful or hateful. Let your elected officials know where you stand. Let them know that that's wrong. It goes against the values we are supposed to hold in this country. So use your voice there. If you can attend and speak up in a school board meeting, in a state legislature hearing, do that. One of the most important things, use the power of your vote. I always remind people, one of the reasons that Dobbs decision came out overturning Roe versus Wade was there were a lot of people in 2016 who chose not to vote. And that vote has very real consequences, or that decision not to vote or to lodge a protest vote, that has very real repercussions. Our current Supreme Court exists because of that election and people choosing not to vote. And now we're seeing what happens when people do not participate in the democratic process. So keep those things in mind. But also one of the most important things is don't get caught up and don't focus on just the people who look like you. I talk about this within the queer community a lot. The queer community represents every single marginalized community. And we are doing nothing but help the people who think none of us deserve rights, the people who think we all are outside of society and don't belong to be part of society. We are helping them when we engage in those same actions within our very own community. Racism, homophobia, misogyny, they all exist within the LGBTQ plus community, and they have no place there. We should be fighting for everyone, not just the part of that rainbow that looks most like us. And that is a lesson for everyone in this nation. Don't just focus on the group that looks most like you. If you are being marginalized in any way, there are lots of other people who are being marginalized, and they don't look like you. So fight for everyone who's being marginalized. So I find hope in younger generations who don't see differences in people the way older generations do. So I put a lot of faith in them, in knowing that they will help create a world where differences aren't seen and they don't tolerate it. But what we have to do is get them motivated to vote. So for me, that's what I think about, and that's where I find hope, knowing that there are people younger than I am who want to make the world better and don't accept discrimination in any way. So let's support them, let's embrace them, let's all get together and fight to make sure every single person in this country can exist as part of We the People. Because as a nation, we have not done a very good job of that. And it's time that we do.
I spend a lot of time with undergrads because now I am on the board of trustees at Beloit College, where I went to school 50 years ago. And I do find that people are thirsty for advice on how they can make a difference, how they can feel less despondent, how they can feel empowered and not overwhelmed. And I'm pretty practical. I say, there really is strategic stuff you can do. My path was to go litigate, and we still need litigators, and we still need good legal education where you can, pick up the mantle and pursue cases on behalf of people on the margins of power. And there's a path to do that. So it's good to be able to plug people into that effort, but no one works in a silo effectively. So litigators actually are part of a larger movement to educate the public and to, assert these rights in a lot of different ways. The gay marriage battle was supported by a coalition of philanthropy organizations that funded, GLAAD and NCLR and Lambda and ACLU to provide expert advice and assistance to those who were providing litigation and statewide political campaigns. All those types of coordinated efforts with advocacy groups are needed when civil liberties, basic civil rights are under assault. And there's a path to get there. So I'm encouraged that people can find those ways to engage and then act on it. In many respects, the history of gay rights could be told by centering Cincinnati as the main character. And it's remarkable because, as we learned when we were talking about Article 12, we went from being an island of hate, the worst place to be if you're a gay person, targeting, and triggering all kinds of boycotts and, doing whatever could be done to dismantle Article 12. We went from that to a city that now funds gender-affirming care as part of its health care for city employees. I mean, good work, That's really something. And so studying the arc of that work, looking at the role of corporations that changed their attitudes, looking at the effectiveness of certain boycotts, looking at the messaging that politicians have chosen, and the fact that they're willing to stand up for gay people and be openly gay and be on counsel or whatever. Those are all lessons to be learned by people going forward so that we can spread this beyond Cincinnati to the whole state.
I think Al brings up a really important point, which I think people don't always think about. It's important for us to know our history. Not just to know what things were like 10, 20, 50 years ago. That's important. We need to know how far we've come. And I think sometimes that's some of the joy we can find, regardless of how horrible things might feel right now. I can think back to when I came out in 1992, and the world is still a better place for me as an out gay man today than it was in 1992. And I think sometimes we forget that. But that requires putting forth a little bit of effort to learn history, to understand how things have changed. So I think that's one of the most important things we can do, just to know what things were like and compare them today. But also when we learn our history, we can uncover some of those strategies that were used in the past to change hearts and minds, to move us forward. And we can learn a lot about those tactics, those strategies, by knowing our history. So that's what I always think about, is let's not think today is only, our reality is today. No, our reality is built on what happened in the past. And there were countless people over time, thinking about the queer community specifically, there were countless people who put everything on the line, including their lives, in order to stand up and say, here we are, we exist. And they did things that helped make change happen. The other thing that I really always think about is, I never once imagined being part of a civil rights fight. I never once imagined suing, having my name on a Supreme Court case. Never thought about that, never planned on it, never expected it, could have never dreamt of it. And yet here I was, John and I were in a spot where we could say, yes, we deserve to exist, we're going to fight. Look at the incredible change that happened because we were willing to say yes. And I think that's something I want people to think about. You never know the power you have to make change if you're willing to say, this is wrong and I'm going to fight for it. So be part of making the world a better place. You never know what you can do. I certainly never expected to have a young woman tell me our lawsuit saved her life. And I know she's not the only one. So always remember that. You have the power to make change. Know your history, learn those strategies, and then employ them to continue making change, to continue moving our country forward towards a more perfect union.
Some of the people who may feel the most despondent are actually best positioned to move us forward as a country. And I mean by that, all the people in the middle. If you're in New York or on the coast or in California, you might think that you just let the national organizations take all the messaging and do all the work of bringing equal rights forward. But if you're in Knoxville, Indianapolis, Gary, Cincinnati, Columbus, those national organizations aren't there. And the interesting thing is, these are urban areas that have big enough populations and problems that they bubble up. Everything that's going on the coast is going on right here. The oppression, the discrimination, the police problems, the gay discrimination problems. And yet, they're small enough that you can actually put your arms around them. You can actually identify who the leaders are of certain groups that need to have their minds changed. So advocacy is more manageable. And I've always found that in smaller Midwestern cities like Cincinnati, we can get to the bottom of things quicker. And if we stay around, we can work together, even with those that are opposed to us. So I encourage people in the middle of the country to see it as an opportunity, because it really is.